2, 1. Testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Over.
You have to tell me whether my voice is
Yeah, I
pitched
will.
right for this.
Right, I can tell pretty well.
Yeah.
It's a pretty good recorder. It's a lot
It
better
is.
than those little bitty
Looks
ones.
like a
you know.
real good one.
It does a lot better, you know, the sound and the inflection and everything, those little ones.
Yeah.
When did you join the service?
In April of 1944.
Okay. Did you volunteer?
After a fashion, yes.
To keep from, from getting
The draft was right after.
Right, I know what you mean.
And so I saw the opportunity to possibly get a commission in the Navy, and that's the way it worked out.
Right. Okay, is that the reason you joined the Navy, was the your ability to get a commission there?
That's right.
Okay, all right, let's go into
How
service.
old?
How old were you?
32, I believe.
When you went into service?
Yes.
Were you?
See, I had a wife and 2 kids.
Well, I'm there.
And had been with TVA for 10 years.
Well, and you were about to be drafted with a wife and 2 children.
TVA moved me from one position to another to try to preserve my draft status. And I could see the way it was going. It wouldn't last much longer. And so I thought, well, if I can get a commission in the Navy, it'll be that much better.
Now they, I think they were running out of manpower pretty fast back in those days, weren't they? I've talked to 1 or 2 other fellows that were in their 30s.
The Navy was?
No, the Army in particular.
Well,
that's the reason that draft was so vicious back then.
Yeah. I presume so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because they were sending them right on to Europe with practically no training.
Yeah.
I've talked to some that went over just cannon fodder, you might say.
You will find in among those letters a piece that I wrote entitled "My 2 Days in the Draft." And I was called and went and took a group down to Oglethorpe for 2 days.
Right.
And I was just tickled by the whole thing, and wrote it down and made copies of it. They thought I was most of the people thought I was an officer in the draft board, you see. And it took me a while to convince them that I was just one of them, only I had the papers.
Tell me where you trained and where you went from base to base, right on up till the time, from Oglethorpe up to the time that you went overseas.
It's on that paper there that I wrote.
Okay.
Let me follow. Let me use that to.
All right.
I trained all up and down the Atlantic coast, going to most of the resorts out of season. My first one was at Hollywood Beach in Florida, and I spent 2 months there on wall-to-wall carpeting and 7 floors but no elevators. I had both indoctrination and then the first of my permanent training, Combat Information Center, in that one building. The next station, there was 2 months, 4 months, April through August. The next station was Newport, Rhode Island, in September. I was there about a month and detached from Newport back down to St. Simon's Island in Georgia. And then back up to Newport. And then I was assigned to a ship being commissioned at Philadelphia.
Okay.
This was the USS Dayton. And there we had some training, some short training away from Philadelphia and back. And of course we had the shakedown cruise as far down as Trinidad. And then left and put the ship in commission at the end of all that. And then we left in April.
Cruiser.
Light cruiser.
My cruiser.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
CL 108.
Mm-hmm.
And of course named for Dayton, Ohio.
Mm-hmm.
And of course we had cruisers like the Navy had cruisers like destroyers about then.
Mm-hmm.
Well, our mission then was to go by way of Panama Canal with a brief stop at Guantanamo, and then with a destroyer escort across the Central Pacific to Hawaii, with a layover there of 10 or 15 days, some additional training, and then with one stop only at Ulithi to the Philippines, a temporary Navy base there called the Leyte Samar. And,
in Hawaii, was there any sign of Pearl Harbor? It had all been cleaned up pretty well.
wasn't able to see that.
Is that right?
Yeah. What we did see were big ships that were the victims of kamikaze dive bombing off of Ulithi. Yeah. And we saw several of those being
I see.
brought back to the States.
Right.
No, I was immediately taken off the ship there, to go over to the land base for visual fighter direction. And the ship, meanwhile, went out to sea for some offshore training. I just was alone. And,
what is visual fighter?
it's the last resort. The ship, the Dayton, along with all the others, was equipped with radar to detect approaching, surface or air attacks. And if the radar lost the thing and it was zeroing in, then you turned to a lone man stationed way up in the around one of the masts of the ship, and he was supposed to be able to see it.
I see.
On the basis of the last bearing from radar.
For incoming fighters, bombers, and that sort of
Again, that was one of the things I was trained for, but never had the actual experience.
I see.
We never suffered it. It did give me a chance to see a couple of things of interest in Japan. The shore batteries guarding the bay, and then way up the two islands between Honshu and Hokkaido. I was up there and saw the Japanese Pittsburgh is what it was, the major city on Hokkaido.
I see.
I would have loved to get back to Japan to see particularly the inland sea, which we saw the shape of it and the outlines of it on radar. And I've seen photographs of it. And it must be physically just a beautiful place.
But you could actually see it from on top of that mast.
But I didn't have the opportunity there.
Yeah.
I could have. Yeah. But that was the last point of retreat for the Japanese Navy. They gathered them into that inland sea.
Okay, now you were on this land base and you were in charge of that. But what happened from then on? The land base in the Philippines is where kind of stuff.
No, I was not in charge of that. We were. Leyte Samar is it's a Leyte inland, one of the inland bodies of water for the Philippines, and then Samar was the islands that cut that off from the main body, and this Halsey's task force was being assembled in that bay, Lady.
I see.
I don't suppose there'll ever be a concentration of surface vessels such as was there.
Yeah, I've heard about that. Yeah.
It was just very impressive to see. Of course, the other thing that interested me personally more than anything else was getting shore base on Lamar once, and they had the longest bar in the world, 1,000 feet. And lo and behold, I got to one end of it, and who should I see but my next door neighbor from Knoxville. We know where to go.
Yeah, right. Longest bar in the world. What was the name of it? What did they call it?
Samar.
The Samar.
Yeah.
I see. Okay. Okay, go ahead.
As I say, we left the Halsey's Fast Carry Task Force assembled there, and we left on the 4th of July. 4 task groups, and these were always centered around one single carrier, and then a ring of carriers and battleships about a mile out, then another mile out, a ring of cruisers and destroyers, and another mile out, just some outlying escort destroyers. And we sailed in that way, subject to several interruptions by typhoons. We were just heading toward the Japanese mainland and Tokyo Bay. And then we cruised back and forth along the Pacific coast of Japan.
When was this?
This was during, the latter half of July and the first 5 days of August. Well, we continued to cruise after the bomb drop, but
I see.
everything was over by the dropping of that first bomb. Of course, it was signed, sealed, and delivered by the second one. But we continued to. Halsey's force continued to cruise up and down the Japanese coast. We actually then finally. We missed out on the climax, the signing of the treaty on the Missouri. We were still outside, cruising against any possibility.
Right.
But then we did stay. We were assigned to a station in Tokyo Bay, and were there until mid-October with a rest leave of a few weeks down at an island in Wetak, I believe it was. And I was fortunate there in getting opportunities to go ashore. The Japanese naval base at Yokosuka, that got pretty boring after a while. But actually, one day I got up to Tokyo before MacArthur got there, and had the pleasure of a lunch in the old Imperial, Frank Lloyd Wright's old Imperial Hotel, which is now gone. And we commandeered a taxi powered by artificial gas, not liquid gas, and told him to drive us to the Imperial Palace. Well, he was scared to death of us. And he said, "You mean right to the palace?" Yeah. We let him off the hook when we got to the gate. But that was very exciting.
How did the Japanese treat you in Tokyo at that early date?
They were, well, as I say, of course we had officers' uniforms on, and they were the people were very humble
Mm-hmm.
and just anxious to please.
I see.
Got into the largest department store. I couldn't buy anything because I didn't have
Mm-hmm.
any real cash. But of course, we had damaged downtown Tokyo with our bombing
Mm-hmm.
a great deal.
I see.
But we had spared the Emperor's Palace. That was then ground,
Mm-hmm.
and some of the Imperial Hotel was still there, and that became the building next to that became MacArthur's headquarters
I see.
for the whole period of occupation.
Were the Japanese troops in Tokyo when you were there?
We didn't see any of the
Mhm.
troops. We saw them as civilians.
I see. That's interesting. What did you think of the people that were in charge of your training from boot camp on up?
Because I didn't get into boot camp. I was in a officers' indoctrination school.
Right. Yeah, that's.
I was very much impressed with it. I thought the Navy was doing an excellent job.
Mhm.
Met some, one example, the man who was in charge of the, I guess it was a squad, no more than a squad, platoon. They'd be the equivalent of an Army platoon. He was a professor, teacher in one of the big private schools down the eastern part of Massachusetts.
I see.
And he applied his
Mm-hmm.
his educational and training for us.
I see.
And then we had a man that I ran into later was fortunate. He was a housing officer there. When I ran into him was when I was trying to get permission to have a discharge out on the Pacific coast instead of coming here. Because I had my family by that time already out there. And I met him as a housing officer when I was making this plea. And we remembered each other, and he just breezed away.
It helps to know people, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Let's see. When did you get back into the States? I believe you told me, but I've lost track of it.
Yeah, well, we left Tokyo the latter part of October and got to San Pedro, California, mid-November.
Okay. Of 1945.
45, right.
Okay.
And the whole ship then was divided into two leave parties. Either first or second leave of 30 days.
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
And of course, the dates were fortuitous to make both of them equally attractive because the first leave party had Thanksgiving as a holiday, and then the second leave party had got to be home for Christmas.
Mm-hmm.
So I fortunately, for my purposes, I was assigned to the first leave party.
Mm-hmm.
And rode a train for 4 nights here to Knoxville, where I met my family.
I see.
And we were able to work out the plans then we had that was 2 Thanksgivings in those times, if you remember.
Yeah, right.
Our first Thanksgiving was in on a train coming through Garden City, Kansas, and bless the good women of that town. They were down on the station platform with the turkey sandwiches,
Mm-hmm.
and that was our Thanksgiving, first one. Then Tennessee was celebrating the second Thanksgiving, so I had that here. And we left the next day, as I remember, to drive then out to the coast, where again I was fortunate in having some old friends in Los Angeles who I said I want to bring the family out here, but I don't know whether I can be assured of housing for them.
Right.
Don't worry about that. They can stay with us
Mm-hmm.
if they have any problem. Well, we didn't. They stayed briefly with them, but the Navy provided housing around each of its bases. So I stayed out there for 2 months in the latter part of February, when I did get my discharge out there.
Okay.
Had the family, and then I had $300 severance in 6 weeks to drive slowly back and forth across the country.
Yes,
Because I was guaranteed of a job back with TVA,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember that.
but I had a feeling that I just shouldn't assume that. It had been so good that it might not be that good again. The one place that the family we could all agree on, if I didn't go back to Knoxville, and Daddy could find a job anywhere he wanted, where would it be? And they all agreed on Flagstaff, Arizona.
Is that right?
But before I really got, and I was heading not to Knoxville then, but to Massachusetts. So the children who had missed so much school that year, Massachusetts had a 2 months longer school year than Tennessee. So I was heading to get them back with my mother up there, and their schooling then would last until, well, through June, instead of being over in April. And of course they had a delightful time when they were there before, and we were just glad of the opportunity. And then that means that we all got back here to Knoxville as a family at the end of June.
I see. Where are you from originally?
Massachusetts.
Are you? My wife, my first wife, had some family out there on the vineyard. I used to enjoy going up there in the summertime. Okay. Do you still keep in touch with any of the people that you served with?
Really, by now, no.
Okay.
I did maintain contact with a few up until a few years ago.
What do you remember most, or what impressed you most about your time overseas?
Time overseas?
Mm-hmm.
Well, of course, just being on the water for that long a time.
Mm-hmm.
I had experience with the seashore, but I had never sailed out, well, of course, with the exception of our shakedown cruise. But to be out of sight of land for hours and surprising differences in that water as we would go. Sometimes the whole can't think of the word, groups of porpoises, and see them just pick up the rhythm of the ship, go like that, and surprising differences of color in the water, and of course differences of light. And the typhoons were.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about those. Did they give a ship as big as a cruiser trouble?
Yeah, they do have a quiet center, and if you can get into that, it's just like peace all over again. But getting into it is hell.
Yeah.
And
is that something they try to do? The skipper, does he try to get his ship into the center of the typhoon?
Yeah.
I see.
And you can imagine the number of ships in Halsey's task force. We got real friendly terms with each other. we had two of those between in July and early August. Well, no, they must have both been in July.
What could they physically damage or sink a ship as big as a cruiser?
Yeah. In fact, one of our destroyers snapped, and the whole, not only the destroyer, one of the United States cruisers, the Indianapolis, the whole front 1/3 of that vessel was snapped off by a typhoon. And everybody aboard was lost.
Yeah, but boy, that's a lot of power, isn't it?
Yeah. And I didn't take much comfort from the fact that my bunk was on the line where that break occurred.
Let's see here. Did you have any other relationships with the civilians overseas other than those that you mentioned in Japan when you were there?
That was the only.
Yeah. How about the?
Well, in Hawaii, some. I had 1 or 2 days of liberty and got to spend some time on Waikiki Beach, one of the bigger hotels.
How about in the Philippines?
We didn't see any civilians.
Is that right?
Yeah.
You didn't? No.
Either it was that Leyte Samar, between water and land, all Navy.
Did you have any contact with Allied troops? British or
No.
French or anything? Okay.
No, because the base that we went to in Trinidad, which was at that time basically British, the island was, FDR had executed this lease deal for American bases, trading for destroyers.
Yeah.
So where we went ashore in Trinidad was all American.
Did you ever wonder what you were doing in the service and why were you there and that sort of thing?
Yes, during those hours of boredom, but I fortunately no, I didn't come away with a totally negative view.
Wasn't anything you dwelled on or worried about?
I'm sorry?
Wasn't anything you dwelled on or worried
No,
about?
not-
Right. Most people
Of
that
course,
didn't bother. They had a pretty good idea where they were.
Because I think the letters, the correspondence will indicate that what I did with any spare time was to write to the family. Try to maintain that.
Right. What did you plan to do after the war was over? I think maybe you pretty well told me. And so the next question, did you end up doing that?
Yes,
I guess
I
you pretty well
did.
did.
I started to say we never did reach Massachusetts before TVA caught up with me by telephone.
That's it.
When I was in Minneapolis seeing a Navy buddy, and the telephone call from TVA was, when are you going to get back? Because it was from my immediate boss when I left. And he says, now I'm leaving TVA. And if you can come back, you don't come back to the job you left, you come back to my job.
That's it.
So that just settled it.
Right. I've heard other fellows that came back, not necessarily to, a guaranteed job to TVA, but other organizations, one kind or another, and they were sort of had gone to the bottom of the stack or something. Everybody else had been promoted while they were gone, and they went back to the same job, and things didn't work out too well for a lot of them.
No, it was me, just the reverse.
Right.
Yeah.
Did you have any feelings about the people of draft age who weren't in the service?
No.
Okay.